This clip is going to answer two separate questions that are related. So the first question it's going to answer is, for each county, how many players play each of the different codes? So up above here we have the actual pivot table that's generated when we answer that question. So in column A, or on the rows, we have all of the counties, and then what we have is for Cavan, they have 2 camogie players, 1 Gaelic footballer, 1 handball player, and no hurling and 1 ladies football player. So they have 5 on scholarships. Down to Kildare, they have 7 camogie players, 2 Gaelic footballers, 1 handball, 2 hurling, and 2 ladies football. That gives them a total of 14. So you have a grand total here working by on a row basis, and you have a grand total working on a columnar basis. So that's where you're looking at it in raw numbers terms. The other way of looking at the similar data is to look at it in percentage terms. So if we look at the percentage terms, what we have is that of the Cavan block of players, 40% of them play camogie, 20% play Gaelic football, 20 handball, 0 hurling, and 20 camogie, or 20 ladies football, sorry. So that totals up to 100%, obviously. 40 plus 3 20s is 100. And that's how you express it in percentage terms. So what we're now going to do is build those two pivot tables. So first of all, we're looking at this at number 8, or example 8 here. We're looking at how many players for each county play the different codes. So back to the scholarships data, and we insert a new pivot table. So we're looking at each county, and when we choose county, that appears in the rows, and then we want to look at the proportion of the players that play each code. So if we click on code and then move the code to the columns, from the rows to the columns, we get a more normal kind of square looking pivot table rather than one big long list. So we want to know how many players play each of the codes. So we want to count them. So the way you count them is you pick the column you want to count. You want to count the code per county. So you just drag the code and drop it into the values. So code is text, as you're aware. Code is either camogie or hurling or ladies football. So when we drag and drop that into the values area, Excel, there's no way it can get an average or a max or a min. So all it can do is count, and that's what it does by default. So anytime you drag a label or a field that's text in nature into the values area, Excel knows the only thing it can do with it is count it. So what it's done is count the occurrences of camogie under Cavan, Gaelic football under Cavan, and so on. So that's how to generate a pivot table where you're counting particular occurrences of whatever. And in this case, we're counting the code within each county. So that's how that makes sense. The second way of looking at the same scenario is so that'll be example. That's example 8 again. So I'll just rename it E8 because I can't give it the same name as the previous example. And then go back to scholarships again, and the question this time, we'll look at number 9 briefly again, is actually I'll put the question into this one just for a moment to paste it in here. So that's the question we've just asked. Within each county, how many players play each code? So now I'm going to go to number 9 briefly and just copy the question. Go back to my scholarships and then insert my pivot table. So again, check that the range of cells is correct and that it's a new worksheet. And it is a new worksheet, so I'll just put the question in here down here for fear if I get it. So it's what percentage of the players in each county play each code. So it's the exact same data we're working with as the last question, except we're looking at a different format. We're looking at percentages rather than numbers. So we choose county, we choose code, we move the code into the columns, we drag that gives you the 2 dimensions to it, and then we drag the code into the values area again. And by default, Excel will count it just like last time. And when it counts it, we've got to go into our value fields list, or value field settings, and change the way it's presented. So instead of count, instead of summarizing values by, which are sum, count, etc., we're going to show values as. And again, the choice we have to make here is what percentage do we use? So we're looking at within each county. So it's what percentage of the players in each county play. So it makes sense for the Cavan figures to add up to 100% here. So we're going to do it by the row total rather than the column total. So when we do that, we see that Cavan has, I said, the camogie is 40%, and the other three are, or three of the others count for the other 60%, and hurling has 0%. So that's the data now presented in percentage terms, and the next thing we have to decide is, do we need decimal points in this, or what level do we need decimal points, what precision do we need? So I'm just going to make it a small bit easier to read by reducing the decimal point, the figures after the decimal point to 1. Or of course we could make it 0, so we could, if we wanted to, depending on the circumstances. So depending on what's asked, we can make that more or less precise. So that's how you create a pivot table, where you count up something and you then express it in percentage terms. And that's the end of the clip.